In the vastness of the universe, the most advanced civilizations prided themselves on their ability to understand everything. No mystery was too deep, no technology too complex. They had cataloged the stars, mapped countless planets, and unlocked the secrets of the cosmos. But even they, with all their power and knowledge, never expected to encounter something as strange and terrifying as human warships. When the first alien ships encountered humanity, they didn't expect much. Humans were nothing special, just another primitive race in the galaxy. At first, the humans had seemed like any other species, a species that had barely crawled out of their planet's gravity, while using simple chemical rockets before stumbling upon fusion-powered ships. Their warships were crude compared to the sleek designs of the Kari, or the living technology of the Solari. They lacked the psychic powers of the Eldrin or the precision of the Jari, who could predict the future with almost perfect accuracy. They were just humans, nothing to fear. But when the first alien ships encountered a human warship, something felt wrong. The TNS Dauntless, a human battlecruiser, was like no ship they had ever seen. The surface was composed of advanced alloys, nothing too unusual. The shields were strong, but not surprising. But as soon as the aliens activated their scanners to look deeper into the ship's core, everything went haywire. The ship's energy signatures flickered wildly. One moment, the reactor read as a fusion-powered engine. The next, it was showing signs of an antimatter drive. The weapons systems fluctuated too, one moment appearing as railguns, the next as energy cannons, and then something that no one could even identify. The readings came back strange, too strange, as if the scanners themselves couldn't understand what they were trying to read. There were blank spots in the data, sections where the scanners couldn't even get a reading. It was like parts of the ship were missing from reality itself, like it wasn't even there. And then something worse happened. The scanners, the deep space sensors, the entire network of the alien fleet suddenly shut down. Every single scanner across their fleet malfunctioned at the same time. The researchers, once confident in their abilities, screamed in panic. Their tech had completely failed them. It wasn't just that the ship was mysterious, it was like it was actively hiding itself from them. The scans couldn't penetrate it. It was as though the Dauntless didn't belong in this universe, or worse, that it was protecting some terrible secret that no one was meant to know. For hours, the alien researchers scrambled to fix their equipment, but it was no use. Their systems were completely fried. The very minds that once believed they understood everything about the galaxy were now filled with terror and confusion. They tried to reset their network, but their attempts were futile. One by one, their implants overloaded, causing their crew to collapse at their stations. Some died instantly. Others clawed at their faces, screaming about whispers in the code, gibbering incomprehensibly. No one had ever experienced anything like this before. The ship wasn't just strange, it was something else entirely, something they weren't prepared to face. After weeks of trying to fix the damage, the Trinax issued a formal order. No Trinax vessel, under any circumstances, was ever to attempt scanning a human warship again. The rest of the galaxy, still unaware of what had transpired, laughed off the Trinax's failure as an anomaly. Surely it was just a glitch, a mistake? There was no way a simple human warship could possess such power. It was just another advanced ship, nothing special. But the truth was that no one was quite sure what had happened, and that uncertainty led to something worse: fear. The first encounter with humanity's warships was supposed to be a simple job, but it had turned into a mystery that no one could solve. And the more they tried to understand it, the more questions piled up, and the deeper the fear grew. Something inside those ships, something hidden, wasn't meant to be understood. Something more terrifying than they ever imagined. Something that would soon change the course of galactic history forever. After the incident with the Trinax, the fear surrounding human warships began to spread across the galaxy like wildfire. No one knew exactly what was inside those ships, but the stories of failed attempts to scan them piled up. And with each story, the fear grew. The Trinacs were a powerful species with some of the most advanced technology in the galaxy, yet they were unable to make sense of the human warships. What if there was something inside those ships that could destroy them? What if it wasn't just technology, but something much worse, something more dangerous than any race had ever encountered? The stakes were clear. The moment any alien species attempted to scan a human warship, they risked losing more than just their technology or their data. They risked losing their very sanity. The first warning came from the Trinacs, but it wouldn't be the last. The Solari, an ancient species known for their mastery of organic technology, thought they were immune to such failures. Their ships were living beings themselves, capable of adapting to almost anything. They believed that, with their organic scanners, they could safely analyze the insides of a human warship without the same disastrous results. But they were wrong. When they tried to scan a Terran dreadnought, their scanners, living organisms, began to shrivel and die, as if the very energy from the human ship was poison to them. The Solari were forced to abandon their mission, horrified by what they had just witnessed. They realized something that no one had even considered before. Human warships weren't just ships. They were alive. The news of the Solari's failure spread, and soon after, the Eldrin, one of the most powerful psychic races in the galaxy, decided to try. Their abilities allowed them to read minds across entire planets, making them the most qualified beings to probe the thoughts of a human ship. The Eldrin's most gifted psychics boarded a human battlecruiser, ready to uncover its secrets, confident that no ship could resist their mind-reading abilities. They were wrong. The moment the Eldrin psychics tried to probe the ship's mind, they came back broken. Their minds shattered under the weight of the ship's thoughts, or whatever was inside it. The Eldrin, beings who could read the thoughts of entire populations with ease, could barely comprehend the power they had encountered. They returned, mumbling incoherently, their psychic abilities severely damaged. No one knew exactly what they had seen, but the Eldrin didn't dare speak of it. They were too afraid. As the galaxy watched, another alien species, the Dajari, decided to take a different approach. Known for their ability to predict the future with near-perfect accuracy, the Dajari believed that they could foresee the outcome of any battle, even one involving a human warship. They prepared their most powerful seers to look into the future, confident that they could at least understand the mechanics of how a human ship operated in combat. But when the Jari attempted to see the outcome of a battle involving human warships, they were met with static. Their visions didn't show the future. They showed nothing at all. And then, worse, they saw a future where they were already dead, long before the first shot was fired. Their predictions turned into nightmares, with no clear outcome, just a crushing sense of dread. The more species tried to understand human warships, the worse the consequences became. They had all underestimated humanity. The stakes were no longer just about understanding the ships. They were about survival. No one knew what would happen to the next species that tried to uncover the truth. Would they lose their minds, like the Trinacs and the Eldrin? Would their technology fail, like the Solari's scanners? Or would they face something far worse, something no one could have predicted? As the fear grew, the Galactic Concord, a powerful alliance of the galaxy's most advanced civilizations, decided to take drastic action. They sent a fleet of the most advanced ships, equipped with the most sophisticated scanning systems ever developed. They thought they could surround a single human battleship, the TNS Harbinger, and finally uncover the truth. They thought they could overpower it, but they were wrong. None of those ships ever returned. There were no distress signals, no wreckage, no explanation, just silence. The truth, whatever it was, had already begun to spread, whispers in the darkest corners of the galaxy. The warning was clear. No one, no matter how advanced, should ever try to scan a human warship again. The Galactic Concord, once so confident in their power, made a decree. No species, no matter how advanced, would ever attempt to scan, track, or study a human warship again. Anyone who tried would face the consequences. It was an unprecedented move, and one that sent shockwaves across the galaxy. The Concorde had once been the rulers of the stars, but now they were afraid of what humans had hidden inside their warships. For some, though, the mystery was too tempting to ignore. The Galactic Concorde's decree was meant to put an end to the mystery. It was meant to be a warning, a final message to the galaxy. Do not attempt to scan human warships. Do not try to understand them. Do not provoke them. But the galaxy was vast, and not everyone heeded the warning. Some species feared human warships. Others, however, saw the warnings as a challenge. Among them were the Var, a race of warriors who believed in strength above all else. The Var did not fear death. To them, battle was the only thing that gave life meaning, and no enemy was too dangerous to fight. When they heard the stories of human warships, they laughed. How could a species so new, so weak, command such fear? They dismissed the Trinax's failures, the Solari's dead scanners, and the Eldrin's shattered minds. To them, it was just cowardice and excuses. So they sent a fleet. The Var didn't come to scan a human warship. They came to destroy it. Their target was the TNS Revenant, a lone Terran battleship traveling through the outer reaches of space. It was perfect, isolated, far from any reinforcements, the ideal prey. The Var fleet, numbering over 30 warships, closed in on the human vessel with ease. They broadcast their arrival loudly, declaring their intent. Face us in battle, humans, or run like the cowards we know you are. But the Revenant did not run. At first, the Var thought the humans were simply accepting their fate. The battleship floated silently in the void, making no attempt to flee or fire. Their scanners, however, picked up something unusual. The ship's energy signature was fluctuating, much like the Trinax had reported before. But the Var were warriors, not scientists. They didn't care what their scanners said. They only cared about how quickly they could tear the ship apart. So they attacked. The first shots should have obliterated the Revenant. The Var ships fired a barrage of plasma rounds, high-energy lances capable of melting through the strongest shields in the galaxy. But the moment the plasma struck, something went wrong. The energy twisted, bending around the human ship as if the space itself had warped. The plasma bolts vanished, not deflected, not absorbed, just gone. Confused, the Var warlords ordered another volley. This time, they fired everything they had: missiles, kinetic rounds, graviton beams designed to crush ships from the inside out. But the result was the same. Nothing hit, nothing landed. And then the Revenant moved. It wasn't a normal movement. It didn't accelerate, didn't follow any known physics. One moment, it was in front of the fleet. The next, it was behind them. Every Var warship's targeting systems failed at once, their computers unable to comprehend how the ship had moved. And then the Revenant fired. The Var warships didn't explode. They didn't even register as being destroyed. One moment they were there, filling the darkness of space with their massive forms. The next, they were gone. There was no wreckage, no energy signature, no remains. Just empty space where 30 warships had once been. Only one Var ship survived, a small scout vessel that had stayed back to monitor the battle. Its crew watched in horror as their entire fleet simply ceased to exist. The last transmission from the Var warlord aboard the lead battleship was not a scream, not a desperate order to retreat. It was a single whispered phrase: "It sees us." The scout ship fled, returning to the Var homeworld to report what had happened. The warriors, so eager for battle, so confident in their strength, fell silent. No one challenged the humans again, but not everyone feared them. While warriors like the Var were humbled by their encounter with a human warship, others remained skeptical. Some still believed that the stories were exaggerated, that the fear surrounding the humans was simply the result of weak-minded races being unable to handle their failures. Among these skeptics were the Zelnari, a species renowned for their intelligence and cunning. The Zelnari were not warriors like the Var. They were scientists, explorers, and master strategists. They did not act on impulse. They did not charge into battle. They observed, they studied, and they found weaknesses. The Zelnari High Council had listened to the reports, but they did not believe them. Ships vanishing without a trace? Scanners failing for no reason? These were impossible things, the kind of stories that primitive species told each other around fires to scare children. The Zelnari did not believe in ghosts, and so they decided to find the truth. They did not send a fleet. They did not send warriors. They sent a single ship, the Silent Eye, a stealth vessel equipped with the most advanced cloaking technology in the galaxy. It could slip past any defense, scan any object, and escape before anyone even knew it was there. The Silent Eye found its target quickly. The human warship was another lone vessel, this time the TNS Obsidian, a cruiser drifting through deep space, seemingly unaware of its observer. The Zelnari crew activated their scanners, eager to uncover whatever secret lay within. At first, everything seemed normal. The ship's hull was advanced, but not beyond understanding. Its energy core was powerful, but nothing too strange. They began scanning deeper. That was when the problem started. Their data screens filled with unreadable symbols, letters and numbers that shifted every second. The ship's power levels fluctuated wildly, displaying impossible readings. The scan systems detected something inside the ship, something alive. But the moment they tried to focus on it, their equipment shut down. And then, for the first time in Zelnari history, their cloaking system failed. The Silent Eye was no longer invisible. The Zelnari crew panicked. This was impossible. Their ship had never been detected before, not by anyone, not by anything. But now every alarm was blaring. Something was inside their systems. Not a virus, not an attack, something else. And then their external cameras picked up movement. The Obsidian was turning, slowly, deliberately, facing them. The human ship should not have been able to see them, should not have known they were there. And yet it was staring directly at them. Then the lights aboard the Silent Eye flickered. A whisper passed through the ship's comms, one that no one had sent. "Leave." The Zelnari didn't hesitate. They turned their ship and ran, leaving behind everything they had gathered. The crew did not speak of what happened. They did not try again. And the Zelnari High Council, once so sure of themselves, quietly erased the mission from their records. But despite the warnings, despite the failed attempts, there were still those who could not resist the pull of the unknown. There were still those who needed to know. And soon one of them would make the greatest mistake of all. Even as the galaxy's most powerful races were beginning to fall silent in the face of human warships, there remained a faction that was not so easily deterred. The Cesari, a race of smugglers, information brokers, and mercenaries, were known for their cunning and their relentless pursuit of secrets. They were not warriors like the Var or the Zelnari. Their strength lay in their ability to uncover and exploit what others couldn't. For them, knowledge was currency, and secrets were the most valuable treasure of all. The Cesari had heard the legends of human warships, of ships that moved in impossible ways and had secrets that could drive a species mad. To the Cesari, these tales were irresistible. They didn't believe in ghosts, curses, or warnings. They believed in one thing: opportunity. And they knew that if they could uncover the truth about human warships, they would hold a power beyond measure. Led by a charismatic and daring captain named Creel, the Cesari decided to take a bold risk. They would set a trap, and this time they wouldn't be content with just scanning a human ship from afar. No, they would bring one in close. They would trick a human warship into entering an isolated region of space, far from prying eyes. And once the human ship was within their reach, they would activate their most powerful scanners, recording every detail about it. They would gather the data, and then they would sell it to the highest bidder, rivals, other species, anyone willing to pay the price for knowledge. Creel knew the risks, of course. He had heard the rumors. He knew what had happened to the Trinax, the Salary, and even the Zelnari. But he didn't fear it. To him, these were just stories. Stories spun by weak species who couldn't handle the truth. The Tsessari were smarter. They would outwit the humans. They would succeed where others had failed. The trap was set. They faked a distress signal, something that would draw a human warship into a trap. It was clever, an old abandoned system, far from any major colonies, with no ships or stations nearby. It would seem like an easy target. A human warship would detect the signal and come to investigate. They'd never suspect that the signal was a ruse. And sure enough, it worked. A single Terran destroyer, the TNS Revenant, emerged from hyperspace. It was smaller than the massive dreadnoughts the Tsessari had heard of, but still, it was a human warship. It was a perfect candidate. The Tsessari waited, hidden in the shadow of a nearby asteroid field, their sensors trained on the incoming vessel. They watched as the Revenant appeared on their scanners, steady, confident, just like any other ship. The Tsessari didn't expect anything unusual. They had prepared for this, but something felt wrong. Even from a distance, Creel could feel it. Something in his bones, a sudden sense of unease. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there. Something about the Revenant felt off. He tried to shake it off. It was just a ship. The plan would go smoothly, just as it had before. The Revenant continued on its course, unaware of the trap awaiting it. The Tsessari waited until the ship was in position. Then they activated their scanners, reaching out with all their technology, their eyes, their instruments, stretching into the unknown. They waited for the data to flood in. They would learn everything about this ship, about its technology, its weapons, its systems. But as they activated their sensors, something changed. At first, there was nothing unusual. The ship's exterior was sleek, as expected. The weapon systems were powerful, but not out of the ordinary. But then the readings started to shift. The data wasn't matching what the Tsessari had anticipated. The ship's energy signature was fluctuating in ways that made no sense. The engines weren't running the way they should have. The weapons systems were unpredictable, constantly shifting between different forms, railguns 1 second, then plasma beams the next. And then, suddenly, the Revenant was gone. It didn't disappear. It didn't vanish into hyperspace. It was simply not there anymore. One moment, it was on the Tsessari's sensors. The next, it wasn't. The ship wasn't moving, not in the way a ship should. It had somehow shifted. Creel watched in confusion as his screens went dark, then flickered back to life, only to show nothing but empty space. No ship, no energy. The data was gone. They were blind. The Revenant had somehow become invisible to them, as if it had slipped out of their grasp completely. And then the Tsessari ship shook. A violent tremor ran through the entire vessel, throwing the crew off their feet. The lights flickered. Systems began to fail. The ship's artificial gravity inverted, sending everyone tumbling toward the ceiling. Alarms blared as the crew scrambled to figure out what was happening. It was chaos. Creel shouted orders, but the words were drowned out by the loud static that filled the ship's comms. The instruments were malfunctioning. Nothing was working. The crew screamed in panic, trying to understand what was going on. But then it got worse. Through the chaos, a voice, no, a presence, began to invade their minds. It wasn't a message, not a transmission. It was something more. Thoughts, memories, visions that were not their own. Creel staggered back from his command chair, clutching his head. The others fell to the floor, writhing in agony, as though something was twisting their minds. The voice, the presence, spoke not in words, but in images. A battle, fire and blood, terrible, unimaginable destruction. But worse still, there was something in those images, something that lurked at the edges, something that stared out from the shadows with eyes that were not human. You were warned. The words cut through Creel's mind, not spoken aloud, but inside him, inside his very thoughts. The vision shattered, the pain stopped, but the damage was done. The Revenant moved again, but this time it was inside the Sasari ship. One moment it was still in space, out of reach. The next it was there, right in front of them, in their very hull. Creel's last thought was one of horror, but it was too late to act. The Revenant had already seen them. Creel gasped, his vision swimming as his body fought against the overwhelming weight pressing down on him. He wasn't sure if it was gravity malfunctioning again or something else. The ship groaned around him, the metal vibrating as if something immense, something unseen, had wrapped itself around the hull. The Revenant was inside their ship. Not physically. It hadn't forced its way into the hangar, hadn't blasted through the hull, but somehow it was here. The Sasari ship's corridors twisted in unnatural ways, shadows stretched where no light should have cast them, and the air felt wrong. Creel forced himself upright, blinking rapidly to clear his vision. His crew lay sprawled across the deck, clutching their heads, gasping for breath. Some muttered nonsense under their breath, words that weren't their own, phrases in languages that had never been spoken before. Others were utterly silent, staring at nothing, their eyes wide with terror. The ship's main display flickered wildly, the data feeds scrolling so fast they were unreadable. Numbers appeared, then vanished, only to be replaced with more nonsense, coordinates to places that didn't exist, energy readings that defied physics, ship schematics that shifted as if the vessel was rewriting itself in real time. Creel's hands were shaking, but he forced them onto the control panel. He had to regain control. He had to... The whisper returned. You were warned. The sound wasn't coming from the speakers. It wasn't coming from anywhere. It was inside him, inside all of them. He felt his heartbeat stutter. His breathing grew shallow. He turned to his navigator, a seasoned Sasari named Jix, but Jix wasn't looking at him. Jix was staring at the air in front of him, his mouth opening and closing in silent horror. Creel followed his gaze. A figure stood in the middle of the bridge. No, not a figure, a shadow. It wasn't a crew member. It wasn't human. It wasn't anything. It had no shape, and yet Creel's mind tried to give it one, tried to force it into something he could understand. But his brain failed him. Every time he thought he could make sense of it, the shape shifted, flickering like a dying transmission. The whispers grew louder. The shadow tilted its head, and for the first time Creel felt something he had never known in his entire life. Something was looking at him, not a scan, not an observation, not the way a predator looks at prey. This was different. It was deeper. It was like something was staring through him, past his flesh, past his bones, past even his thoughts. It was looking at something beneath all of that. And then the lights flickered again. The shadow was gone. Jix collapsed to the floor, gasping. Creel barely heard him over the alarms still blaring through the ship. Every system was failing, one by one. The air felt heavier. The crew was panicking, shouting orders, running diagnostics, trying to do something, but there was nothing left to do. Creel's instincts took over. His body was on autopilot. Years of experience, years of escaping impossible situations, all led to a single command. Get us out of here! The pilot, hands trembling, barely managed to activate the emergency thrusters. The ship lurched violently, breaking free from the asteroid field. The Revenant did not pursue. It simply watched. And then the ship was gone. Not in the way a ship should disappear. There was no warp jump, no light-speed burst. One moment the Revenant was there, and the next it wasn't. For a long moment, no one spoke. No one moved. Then Jix let out a ragged breath. Creel turned to him. "What did you see?" he asked. Jix's hands were still shaking. His eyes, once sharp and full of cunning, were dull now, distant. "There was—" Jix's voice cracked. "There was something inside that ship. It wasn't the humans. It wasn't a machine. It was—" He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Creel swallowed hard, turning back to the main display. The ship's data feeds had finally stopped glitching. They had barely managed to escape. But something still felt wrong. And then Creel saw the transmission logs. His blood ran cold. The Revenant had sent something. Not a message, not a warning, just coordinates. For most of the galaxy, this would have been enough. The Trinax had failed. The Var had failed. The Zelnari had failed. And now the Caesari, who had built their empire on uncovering secrets, had been utterly broken by what they had encountered. The Galactic Concord had made its decree long ago. No species was to ever scan a human warship again. But there were always those who refused to listen. The Dlik, an ancient species of scholars and archivists, were unlike the Caesari. They were not driven by greed or conquest. They did not seek power. They only sought understanding. To them, knowledge was sacred, and to them, nothing was more sacred than the mystery of humanity. The Dlik had watched as every species before them had failed. But they did not believe in failure. They believed in preparation, in calculation. And so they sent their finest ship, the Seeker's Gift, to shadow a human fleet. They would not scan the ships directly. They would not probe them with reckless curiosity. They would simply observe. For weeks the mission was a success. The Dlik ship followed a Terran battle group from a safe distance, recording its movements, analyzing its patterns. The humans did not react. It was as if they didn't care. But then something changed. One day, without warning, the Terran flagship, the TNS Omen, stopped. The rest of the fleet continued on its course, but the Omen remained perfectly still. The Dlik crew hesitated. They had done nothing to provoke a response. So why did it feel like the Omen had suddenly noticed them? A tension filled the bridge of the Seeker's Gift. The captain, a veteran explorer named Kethril, debated whether to turn back. They had recorded weeks of data. That alone was an achievement. But curiosity was the foundation of Dlik civilization. Kethril hesitated for only a moment before issuing the order. One scan, passive only, just enough to understand why it stopped. The order was carried out. The ship's sensors reached out, gently, carefully, as if trying not to disturb something sleeping. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then every screen on the Seeker's Gift went dark. The ship shook. The crew screamed as the artificial gravity inverted. Instruments exploded in bursts of static and fire. And then the voices began, not through the ship's speakers, inside their minds. They were not words, not commands. They were memories, not their own. They saw fire. They saw steel. They saw war, stretching across the stars, a battle that had never been recorded in history. And then, for the first time, they understood. This wasn't just about human warships. It was about what was inside them. And it had just woken up. The Seeker's Gift was no longer in control. The ship shook violently, as if some unseen force had gripped it in a vice. The crew had lost all sense of direction. The ship was twisting and turning, veering off course, but not by the hands of any pilot. The sensors went haywire, screens flashing, readings shifting, every system malfunctioning beyond repair. But it wasn't the ship that was malfunctioning. It was the crew. The voices in their minds were louder now, overwhelming them with visions. It was as if the TNS Omen had opened a door into something vast and ancient, something buried deep inside humanity's warships, something that had been waiting for eons. The visions began to twist and distort, showing the crew of the Seeker's Gift things no one should ever see. They saw galaxies burning. They saw planets torn asunder by weapons far beyond anything they had ever imagined. They saw ships not as machines, but as prisons, holding something terrible within. They saw something that had once been trapped, but now it was stirring again. For Kethril, the captain of the Seeker's Gift, the sight was unbearable. He collapsed to his knees, clutching his head as the whispers grew louder, closer, more invasive. The darkness in his mind stretched endlessly, each moment a nightmare that could not be escaped. The crew, one by one, fell to the floor, writhing in pain, their bodies convulsing as they screamed in agony. And then there was nothing. The ship went silent. Kethril could feel it before he opened his eyes. There was no longer any noise. The crew was still. There was no longer any tremor in the ship. It had stopped moving. But something was different. Something was watching them. Kethril slowly opened his eyes, expecting to see the walls of his ship, but what he saw instead was a vast, empty void. There was no Seeker's Gift. There was no ship. He was floating in nothingness. A presence lingered just beyond his comprehension, a shape that was not a shape, a force that had no name. And it was staring at him, not physically, but in a way that he felt every molecule of his being pierced. He felt himself unraveling, his mind stretched beyond its limits as something ancient touched his consciousness. Suddenly, he was back on the Seeker's Gift, his hands clutching the console. The cold metal of the bridge floor beneath him was the only thing that felt real. His crew was still there, lying motionless, their bodies frozen in some kind of trance, their eyes wide and unblinking. Kithril's hands trembled as he reached for the console. He had to warn them. The Dlik High Council had to know. They needed to understand what they had just witnessed. He could feel the presence inside his mind, pressing against him, the whispers growing louder, more insistent. And then it spoke. "You have seen too much." The voice was not spoken, not transmitted through the ship's speakers. It was inside his head, inside his very thoughts. Kethril could feel the message, not as words, but as a force, a warning, a command. The presence, whatever it was growing impatient. With shaking hands, Kethril sent a message, the last one he would ever send. It wasn't a full transmission. It was too late for that, but it was enough. A single phrase, a warning for anyone who could understand it. "It is waking?" Then, without warning, the lights on the Seeker's Gift flickered one final time, and everything went dark. The transmission was gone. The ship was gone. The crew was gone. The Seeker's Gift vanished into the void, its final signal lost to time. Back at the Dlik High Council, the message was received, but it made no sense. The data was corrupted, the transmission incomplete. But it was enough to set off alarms. The Dlik were no fools. They had never encountered anything like this before. The High Council convened in secrecy. There were whispers, rumors, but no clear answers. The Seeker's Gift had been lost. The crew had disappeared. And Kethril's message, "It is waking," left them all with one undeniable truth. Something had stirred inside humanity's warships, something ancient, something terrifying, and something that had never been meant to be unleashed. The Dlik, who had once believed that knowledge was the key to everything, now found themselves in a terrifying predicament. What had they uncovered? What had they learned about human warships that no one else had dared to understand? As the rumors spread across the galaxy, more and more species became wary. The Seeker's Gift was only the latest in a long line of failures. First the Trinax, then the Solari, then the Eldrin, the Zolnari, the Sisari, now the Dlik. Every race that tried to understand what was inside the human warships had paid a terrible price. And yet, some continued to believe that there was something worth uncovering, that there was something inhuman hiding within those ships, something that was worth the risk. But as the galaxy learned from each failed attempt, the truth became undeniable. It was not the humans who were the greatest threat. It was what they had locked away in their warships. And now the question on everyone's mind was this: what would happen if it ever got out? The galaxy trembled under a blanket of silence that spread like a shadow. The Seeker's gift had been lost. The Dlick High Council had sealed their records, erasing the mission from their archives. But whispers persisted, carried from one star system to the next, across black markets, hidden stations, and deep space stations. The truth was out there, a secret too terrible to be ignored. The fear that humanity's warships stirred had become a universal truth, a truth buried in hushed voices and fearful glances. No species dared to approach the Terran ships, no matter how advanced, no matter how curious. The galaxy had learned to avoid them, to give them space, and to never, ever provoke them. And yet, as the years passed, the mystery remained. Some believed the TNS Revenant had been the first of many, a warning to all who came too close. But there were always those who could not leave things unexplored. One such individual was Vaya, an independent, ambitious explorer who had spent years tracing the paths of the lost ships, the ones who had dared to scan the Terran warships. She had followed the tails, pieced together the fragments, and traveled to the outer reaches of known space. And now she stood on the edge of something no one had ever dared to touch, the coordinates Kethral's final message had left behind. The warning was clear. It is waking. Vaya, however, was not afraid. Her ship, a sleek modified freighter called the Wanderer, had no weapons. She wasn't a warrior. She was a scholar, a seeker of knowledge. She had spent years studying the patterns of the human warships, and something inside her told her that the truth was out there, waiting to be uncovered. The galaxy had hidden its head in the sand for far too long. It was time to confront the horror. It was time to understand it. Her ship approached the coordinates slowly, cautiously, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. A sector of space that was uncharted, a place where even the most advanced star maps had no record. No species had ventured here in millennia. The place was marked as a black hole on every map, an area that never existed, a void that no one could explain. Yet Vaya pressed forward. As she neared the unmarked sector, her instruments began to fail. First, the navigation systems flickered. Then the artificial gravity fluctuated. Finally, her communications equipment went silent. She felt the air grow heavier, thicker, as if the ship itself was being pulled into the depths of an unseen force. Yet her resolve remained firm. She had come too far to turn back now. Then she saw it. At first it appeared as a dark shape, faint in the distance. As the Wanderer drew closer, it became clearer. A massive, dreadnought-sized ship, almost too enormous to be real. It was unlike anything she had ever seen. Its hull was dark, not the metal of most ships, but something else, organic yet metallic at the same time. It was like a dead body, suspended in space, its lifeless surface pulsing with a faint, unnatural glow. Vaya's heart raced. This was it, the ship at the center of all the rumors, all the whispers. Humanity had built this. No, not built it, created it. It was the first human warship, the one that had started everything. As her ship neared the dreadnought, she activated the scanners. They beeped to life, but they didn't return any data. The ship's energy signatures were impossible to decipher. It was as though the Wanderer had entered a zone where no technology could function. She was trapped, and then she heard it, the whisper. "You have seen too much." The voice was not spoken aloud. It was in her mind, inside her thoughts, deep in her consciousness. The ship was alive, and it knew she was there. Panic began to rise in Vaya's chest. She tried to turn her ship away, but her controls were unresponsive. The Wanderer didn't move. She looked out at the massive dreadnought. The moment her eyes locked onto the ship, she felt a presence inside the metal, inside the very core of the dreadnought. Something was awake. The ship was watching her. Vaya's breath quickened, her pulse racing as she slammed her hands against the console, trying desperately to get any kind of response. But it was too late. The dreadnought moved, not in the way a normal ship would, but in a way that defied all the laws of physics. It shifted, its massive form twisting through space as if reality itself had bent around it. She had uncovered it. The dark secret humanity had locked away. But now the consequences of that discovery were becoming clear. The ship was alive, and the horrors that had been sealed away inside were no longer contained. Suddenly, the Wanderer was pulled into the gravity of the dreadnought, drawn in by some unseen force. Vaya couldn't control her ship. It was helpless against the pull. Her hands flew to the emergency thrusters, but there was no use. The dreadnought's energy signature was overwhelming, flooding her systems with an impossible force. Her ship shook violently as it was pulled closer, its hull screeching under the pressure. And then, with a final terrifying crack, the Wanderer was swallowed by the darkness of the dreadnought. Everything went black.